Is Spider-Man out of the MCU, or is more about to be done? Well, let's dive in. Hey there, this is Perch, and the following video is pure conjecture. I have not even read too much about the story. I've read the initial articles from Variety and kind of some of the breakdown between Sony and Marvel, and I just want to give you some perspective from a completely uneducated, but referencing the past. The education is all from what's gone down in the past and how that just might influence our current situation or our future. So, in a nutshell, what had basically happened is Sony has the rights to Spider-Man and the Spider-Verse, if you will, the various films, Mobius. Why are they doing a? Well, anyway, they also have Venom. They have the Spider-Verse. The Miles Morales Spider-Man, just kind of that Spider-Man universe of films. And Marvel, of course, Disney has the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which has just been augmented by the Fantastic Four and the X-Men and kind of a lot of those properties. And Sony owning Spider-Man has always been this kind of one-off situation, but Sony's done a lot with Spider-Man. It's important to remember that, there's been the Tobey Maguire and then the Andrew Garfield Spider-Mans before the current Spider-Man. So there's been a few different films. There's been 5 Spider-Man films really kind of out before much of the MCU. The Andrew Garfield Spider-Man, of course, came during kind of the build up to the MCU, but in a lot of cases, those were early efforts, and Sony has had a vested interest in continuing the Spider-Man property for some time. It's not quite the same as Fox that was putting out some of these Marvel films, but it felt more like a managing a property as opposed to something a little bit more central to their business. The Spider-Man game, obviously a huge success for the PlayStation on the gaming side, and Sony buying Insomniac to kind of bolster their portfolio and bring things like the Spider-Man game in a little closer to the vest in the future for themselves. So what happened? Well, there's some different reports out. Basically, the two studios were bickering about something. We can speculate what that something is about: control and money. And in the end, whatever the dispute is, it comes down to control and money. But basically, talks kind of broke down after the last Spider-Man, the Far From Home Spider-Man. There was going to be always this moment in time where Sony and Marvel would have to come back to the table to kind of renew or figure out their current agreement. Now, Far From Home made a lot of money. Marvel and Kevin Feige, there's not an R in there, but Feige, let's say Feige. Why not? Why not do that? I like to butcher people's names. They certainly worked together for Spider-Verse and for Spider-Man's appearances in the MCU, both in Civil War and then the 2 Avengers films. Spider-Man was a pretty big part of the 2 Avengers films, and Robbie Downey Jr. coming and being a part of Spider-Man Homecoming, and then other elements, Nick Fury and some other parts showing up in Far From Home. So it was a very connected film, and the two sides did a lot to really help each other out. And what was going to hit is if the film didn't do well, and so there were definitely some people within Disney who were, in some weird kind of sick way, kind of rooting for the film from Far From Home not doing well, because then the rights would have more cleanly moved back into some level of control. Not all control, but it would have made Disney's position a little stronger. But the film did well. And unfortunately, the film doing well had the side effect of both Disney, Marvel, and Sony claiming credit for it doing well. And this goes to, somewhat the Tom Hardy Venom movie. There's some talk that Kevin was involved in at least helping produce and do some uncredited things there. So Sony finds themselves with a, not a huge universe. They've toyed around with the idea of a Spider-Man connected universe, and they're clearly going to do a little bit of that. But there's certainly some strength there they're coming in with. But Spider-Man at the same time is not all of Marvel, and it doesn't have the the strength of the entire weight of all of Marvel. So they're feeling like they've got some room at the table to kind of come a little bit harder at negotiating. And Disney, on the other hand, they are playing with this is Disney when it's most dangerous, is when they feel like they both have advantages and disadvantages at the same time. And Disney finds them, and they found themselves in this position a lot, where they've got kind of a mix of strength, and that's worked out well for them in their negotiations with Star Wars and with some of the Lucasfilm properties. It worked out very, very well for them with Fox, where they had a lot of strength going in, but also some weakness about how the MCU would ultimately progress if that deal hadn't gotten done, and the overall content library Disney desperately needed from Disney Plus. So they were in a mixed bag situation, and when Disney historically is in a mixed bag situation of strengths and weaknesses, that's when they tend to get pretty serious, pretty aggressive, and pretty sharp. That's when Disney tends to puff out its chest more and try and win with bluster. And that seems to be the approach that's kind of going on here. They basically are sending a message to Sony of like, no, we are going to demand that we keep control and we're in charge, and we're they want a commanding presence. And so this is a standoff that's going to play out. And the way it's getting reported right now is like Spider-Man out of the MCU. The two sides have walked away. And the reality is those are written by people who want to sell headlines and are is a little bit kind of silly. There is not a Spider-Man appearance in the MCU currently slated through at least 2022. Maybe there would be another Spider-Man movie, probably, but at best, another Spider-Man film would be 2022 late, if you think about it. At best, we're really talking 2023 before there would be another Spider-Man movie, unless they really kind of hustled and cut corners and got things out the door. Disney wasn't going to do that as part of their overall slate of films. They want to now direct kind of more of the attention to kind of building up Doctor Strange and getting some of this kind of bridge Phase 4. Phase 4 is a lot like Phase 2, and it's a bridge to the next big tentpole. The next big tentpole is obviously going to include things like Fantastic Four and X-Men and some of those properties. So Phase 4 is always a building stage, and having Spider-Man smack in the middle of it was not something Disney was necessarily particularly interested in doing. So now is the time to play hardball and dig in and see how things will go. Because, yeah, again, despite all the articles saying Spider-Man out of the MCU, Spider-Man's not really out of anything. Homecoming is, going to come out on DVD, and people will be able to watch it there, and it's still going to be, Spider-Man's still going to show up in Disney parks and on Disney cruise ships and things, and this is going to play out for a while. And unless there was going to be a surprise Spider-Man appearance in one of the MCU films in Phase 4, which there was no indication there would be, Spider-Man wouldn't really appear as out of the MCU for 3 years or so. So they've got time, is the point. Both sides have time to figure this out. Meanwhile, Sony is going to push ahead and try and greenlight a sequel to Spider-Verse and get, another Venom movie probably out the door, and something out of Mobius apparently with Jared Leto. So they're gonna push forward to kind of strengthen their hand a little bit while all this is going on. Now the reality is, Disney needs Spider-Man as a recognizable character, and they know it. They do not have, despite the big success of Black Panther, Captain Marvel, these are not yet iconic superheroes everybody knows. The licensing machine, the book machine, all the rest of this stuff hasn't taken off as much as it needs to. Now, it probably will, but you basically look at the set. I mean, the comic books are not moving the needle for Disney and those properties, that kind of IP in terms of mass consciousness right now at all. It's not like I'm not saying that from the perspective of their bombing. I'm saying it from the perspective of, for them to have a big cultural effect, they've got to add, basically a zero to the amount of units they're shipping. If Captain Marvel's shipping about 40,000 units, it needs to be shipping about 400,000 units for that comic book to really start to take hold in a meaningful way and move the needle. Otherwise, the toys, the licensing, even if they put out a Captain Marvel book, or if they hire the animation studio to do some Captain Marvel cartoons or something, that's going to have, a 10x effect on the kind of public consciousness of the character. The comic book is not going to move it. And I mean, you can tell in the sense that even like the comic book of Captain Marvel's got an upcoming storyline of Captain Marvel becomes bad and evil and all the rest. I can already hear some people in the background going, "Well, how would you notice?" No, I mean they're running an evil Captain Marvel storyline coming up here pretty soon after the current one, and Black Panther's kind of running the back to Earth space opera, and then they have to find a new writer for Black Panther. So both are in like a rebuilding stage. Neither one's going to be selling anywhere close to 100,000 copies, let alone enough to really matter from a getting characters recognized. So Spider-Man is their guy. They've lost Iron Man, they've lost Captain America. MCU needs Spider-Man to be some of that connective thread. It's down to Spider-Man and Thor and sort of Guardians a little bit, sort of, but that's going back out into space. Meanwhile, DC at least has some signs of some strength with what they're doing. At least Aquaman did well, Wonder Woman did well. The sequel to Wonder Woman will do well, and then they've got to figure out what the next thing is that they can put out. Is it this new Batman? This Patterson Batman might wind up being what is needed to kind of push that franchise forward again. And so Marvel knows, in the long run, they need Spider-Man. They need to bring these things through. There's too many gambles right now. And when you create a billion-dollar franchise, as fans, we look at that and go, well, we hit the pinnacle and now it can be a decline. Nobody at Disney is thinking that way. I guarantee you the conversations at Disney are saying, all right, well, which film is going to be in-game? We're building to that, right? Nobody is taking their ball and going home. They're desperately planning and thinking and trying to figure out how to top in-game in terms of profit. And that's a huge hill to climb. So they cannot slow down. They ultimately are going to have to come to some kind of agreement, terms, relationship with Spider-Man. On the other end, Sony also, they can't survive on their own. I mean, Disney is a powerful and ugly competitor in this sense, and they will just suck all the oxygen out of the room. I mean, it hasn't gotten nasty yet, but just wait if this drags on for Disney to start counter programming against Spider-Man with some of the movies and other things. They will just completely and absolutely pull a fox, if you will, on them, and then it's Disney is left out in the cold. That's where that's headed too. So both sides are going to have to suck it up at some point. The trick to these kinds of deals and these negotiations is to figure out a way that both sides can save face, and that is the trick. That's going to be some combination of favorable licensing terms, producer credits for each, Disney kind of acknowledging that Sony has a unique and special thing going on there. The route may be through the games, where Disney basically comes and says, why don't Insomniac and Sony go ahead and work with Square Enix and do some more Marvel type games in this vein, and you guys can own that, and you can really make that your own and put out really high quality. In return, we're gonna own and manage more of what's going on with the film, and that could be part of the way this helps everybody win. The one difference between Sony and Marvel, and granted, all the negotiations, at least as far as you can tell, are happening between Sony, the U.S. entity, and Disney, is a U.S. entity, and so they're happening at that level. But the backdrop we're not seeing is that the Japanese involvement with Sony, the U.S. company, how the parent is on some level influencing this stuff, it will make Sony a little bit tougher, a little bit more resolve in blinking than Fox ultimately was, because there is the way Disney plays ball, and this is one reason why Disney, the Disney theme park in Tokyo is not owned by Disney; it's owned by OLC, and that is it's a little known fact, and part of the reason that weird dynamic exists is that Japanese culture, Japanese business is a very good foil to American business. That's why American business often struggles with Japanese business, because there's a lot of things mixed up that are not always intuitive for American businessmen. There's an honor component. There's a humility component. There's a lot of little things in there that can be awkward if you're not well versed in that. And Disney obviously knows how to make deals, and they're very good at that. But historically, Japanese business has been a bit of Disney's kryptonite. Of no pun intended with comics. It's been one of their places where they've struggled to utilize their very tried and true strategy of how they get what they want. So again, this is a U.S. Sony versus Disney. So please, nobody jump in there and say, "Oh, they're not negotiating with the Japanese." I know that, but the parent is Japanese ultimately with Sony, and that there will be some cultural impact there. There will be some influence there, and that's one card Sony has up their sleeve because they have successfully gone up and negotiated against Disney in the past and won. And they're one of the very few companies that's been able to do that. So how will that play in? Not sure, but anyway, that's kind of my assessment of it. I think a deal gets done. I think a deal gets done in a year, maybe 2 years. The reality is a deal doesn't need to get done right now, and so it won't. It's better for both companies to play it out and see if either one can gain the upper hand, and so they'll both play that strategy and try and make something happen for themselves. But you may have questions, so if you do, throw them in the comments below. Would love to answer your questions. Bring them on. Like, subscribe, click the bell for notification. Let me know what you'd like to hear, and follow me on Twitter at Comic Perch. Thanks very much.